Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with Marion Neisen, who's a certified grief recovery specialist and who's from the grief recovery team. So, Marion, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Dana. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go through the presentation. As you know, with a webinar, you can ask questions, so feel free to submit some questions if you have any, and we'll get going. So just to give you an overview of what I'll be covering today, I'll be doing a little welcome and introduction, and also talking about grief in the workplace with respect to educational support, sensitizing the work environment, the hidden cost to the workplace, such as presenteeism versus absenteeism, how you can offer support both as an employer as well as a coworker, and onto that, how you can help. I'll talk a little bit about the grief recovery team and who we are, and give you some contact information at the end. So just to introduce you, the grief recovery team was founded by myself and Scott Robbins in 2013, and we have since added a team member, and her name is Julie Stevenson. We are all certified grief recovery specialists through the Grief Recovery Institute out of Sherman Oaks, California. So our mission as a grief recovery team is to educate people about the myths of grief, delivering this assistance to the largest number of people in the shortest period of time that we can. And we want to bring grief out of the closet and isolation and enable people to share openly without judgment or analysis. And my personal mission is to change the face of grief one listening heart at a time. So I'll talk a little bit more about the grief recovery team a little bit later on. So let's talk about grief in the workplace. So first of all, addressing what is grief. So the Grief Recovery Institute's definition is it's the normal and natural reaction to loss. It is the conflicting feelings caused by the end or a change in familiar pattern of behavior. It's one of the life's most stressful events. It takes time to heal, and everyone responds differently. Grief is unique in itself to each individual, and we need to help people cope with those changes in our lives. And it's just part of who we are as human beings. And we don't need to go through it alone, though. So some of the education around this, that there's some myths involved with grief that, particularly in the North American society, we have grown up with. And so I'll address those, as well as talk about the diversity of losses and stages of grief versus stages of dying, and intellectual versus emotional. So moving on to the 4 symptoms of grief, for example, there's physical, emotional, behavioral, and social. And then we have the symptoms on the job performance that you'll want to pay attention to for your own employees who are working through their grief. We'll talk about the intensity and the number and duration of symptoms vary, and some examples. So sensitizing the work environment. The 4 symptoms of grief are, as I mentioned, physical, emotional, behavioral, and social. And with the physical, people can experience extreme fatigue or exhaustion. At the same time, though, their symptom could be extreme adrenaline flow, where they need to be busy, and just keep running. And that's a bit of a coping mechanism for some people. Lots of other physical symptoms, being distracted or they can't focus, they distance themselves from others, they get some pain and shakiness, there's listlessness and disorientation, migraines, headaches, dry mouth, heavy sighing or shortness of breath, empty or hollow feeling in their stomach. Also, there can be a lot of numbness in the heart area as well. So you may have heard of, you know, I'm experiencing a broken heart. I can personally attest to that, as my previous husband died in 2007, and that was near the end of that year. And on January 1st, 2008, I actually experienced the pain in my heart, which felt like a broken heart. So it is true. It does happen. And so just for you to be aware of that on your own personal level. In terms of the next three symptoms, one being emotional, there can be an obvious sadness, anger, and fear. Could be anger around, you know, what the griever could have done more, better, or different in that relationship with that loss. It could be that there's guilt around that. Could be relief too. The other thing that people will experience is, when they're grieving, is what could have been. So a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. So if someone's miscarried, for example, and that is a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations for them of what that child could have been for them in their relationship. So there's lots of emotions that are wrapped around this thing called grief. And I usually say that it's a messy thing. Other ones that are attached to emotional are vulnerability, abandonment, etc. Under the behavioral, there's, as I mentioned, the adrenaline flow, so the inability to sit still. There's some regrets, there's anger and disbelief, agitation or frustration. People may be very short with you, when normally that's not behavior that they demonstrate on a daily basis. And a feeling of being alone for some people. That leads to the social symptom category of grief, where there's a withdrawal from friends or social situations or activities or work. You may find that if you have a coworker who's grieving, they may try to not be involved in as many social activities with their coworkers had they been doing that before. So just stay in tune with those particular behavioral type situations that you see. So with respect to on-the-job performance and the symptoms, you'll see some overlap here, of course, but the primary ones are an inability to concentrate or a lack of focus. And there can be a lack of motivation where their mindset changes in that they may believe, well, what's the point? Like, I can't live anymore, or I don't want to go on anymore. And there's more to work than, or there's more to life than work. So there's a lack of motivation at work. And there's difficulty making decisions. There can be some confusion and memory lapses. Worrying about other family members is a big symptom that people will be concerned about as a griever. They will be worrying about their family members, and also in tandem with that, their finances, especially if they end up being the sole income earner. There's a change in appetite, sleeping habits, so it could be eating more, eating a lot less, sleeping more, eating a lot, or sleeping a lot less. Energy levels go high and low. There's, as I mentioned, the withdrawal from social situations and an increased risk of illness or injury. So if you have people, grievers, who are on production line or working with equipment, please pay attention to them, as if they have a lack of focus or an inability to concentrate, then that could cause an injury for them. So, hidden costs to the workplace. Presenteeism, you've probably heard of this term. It's basically similar to absenteeism, except that the person, the employee, is at work. But their mind really isn't at work. It's not in the game. And so we lose 30 to 50% of productivity because of presenteeism. So even think when you're at your best, you know, sometimes our minds wander when we're at work, and sometimes we need to do that in order to just kind of rejuvenate ourselves and get back to the task at hand. But this is one that is pretty prevalent amongst grievers. So just be watchful of that and mindful of that. No one person is affected by a coworker who's a griever. So if you look at the example on the screen, grief in the workplace costs billions of dollars every year. The Grief Recovery Institute, who I said we took our training through, they did a study called the Grief Index, and they have various articles in that grief index that speak to the billions of dollars that workplaces are affected by. And if I take the example down below where you have one worker, a griever, at $50 per hour times 12 hours per week equals $600 times 50 weeks a year, given the fact that there's 2 weeks vacation at a minimum, then that's $30,000 per year of lost productivity. And that I'm just taking an average number of hours per week that a coworker could potentially be unproductive. And then let's add in 2 more coworkers at $50 each, and that becomes $60,000 per year with those 2 coworkers, and add that to the one griever, $90,000 per year. That's not also counting the manager that may be involved and any others that provide support to the grieving worker.
So, Marion, how do we then, what's the best route? I mean, not just to save money, but in the long run, how do you help people to get back on their game the quickest? Is there a way?
So the next few slides I'll be talking about, you know, what you can do and what not to do, what to say, what not to say. And so those, and some practical ways that coworkers and managers can help their employees through this process. The biggest one for me is patience and just to be watchful of your coworkers, and if they're demonstrating unusual behaviors that they wouldn't normally demonstrate, then you may want to just check in with them.
Okay.
Would be a good way. It's just checking in. So moving to what Dana was asking about, here are some things about how you can understand the symptoms and use your patience in what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, and then some practical ways to help. So what to say is on the left-hand side, and what not to say is on the right-hand side. What to say to people is, I can't imagine how you are feeling. That is probably one of the best things that you can say. Obviously, I am sorry is an important one as well. At the same time, when you say, I can't imagine how you are feeling, you are really speaking the truth. Now, you may have had a similar loss. So, for example, if my mom dies and my good friend and her mom dies, our feelings and our experiences are going to be different, because the relationship that I have with my mom and the relationship my friend has with her mom are different, and they're unique. And I may be aware, or I may think or assume that my friend had a good relationship with her mom when really she didn't. And I may have had a really good relationship with my mom, so I cannot assume that my friend is feeling the same way about her mom dying. And also, I can't assume that she is going to be, really, really sad. Of course she's going to be sad, but it might be more about, remember what I said earlier about what could have been done more, better, or differently, and what could have, the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. So maybe there's a loss of that hope of my friend having a better relationship with her mom. So this is one of the reasons why that line for me personally is one of the best ones to be able to say to anyone. Now, if you don't know the person that well, the griever that well, you could just say, what happened? And they will tell you whatever they want to tell you. If you're, a good friend, but you don't know everything that happened because it was very sudden death, then asking what happened is really helpful because it gives the griever the chance to tell their story. And the griever really, they do want to talk about the loss. They just want to, do it in their own time and in their own way. So by asking what happened, then that gives them that opportunity to tell the story in their way, and whatever way that may be. Another one that is helpful is, how can I help? Rather than saying, let me know if you need anything, or call me if you need anything, I would say 80% of the time a griever is not probably going to reach out to you unless you're a dear friend. Then they may reach out to you to ask for help. But asking, how can I help, or saying, is there something practical I can do for you, like pick up your kids and take them to school in the morning, or pick them up and take them to appointments after school. Look after them between the time when you get home, when the griever gets home from work, and when the kids are off school. That is something practical and very helpful to the griever. So there's a few more there as well. I'm thinking of you. I want you to know that I care very much. I'm here for you. Make sure that when you say these things that you sincerely mean them. When you say I'm here for you, grievers will take that to heart, and they will assume that if they pick up the phone and call you, that you will be there for them. So it's very important that when you say something to a griever that you sincerely and genuinely mean it. And as I mentioned before, do not offer help if you do not mean it. So what not to say? Some of these can be fairly damaging for people in terms of, even though the first one, if I use the name Sally, for example, Sally is in a better place. Albeit one may think that is true because perhaps the loved one went through a major trauma or major illness before they died, and so one assumes they're in a better place. That doesn't help the griever, because the better place for their loved one to be is by their side. God doesn't give us anything we can't handle. We just need to be cautious about this one because we need to understand who the griever is, and God may not be part of their life. And so saying that it could be damaging for that griever. The other thing is God doesn't give us anything we can't handle. Isn't really helpful either for the griever, because right at that moment they're thinking, like, it can't get any worse, can it? So how can I handle anything else? Or I'm having a hard time handling this. So just be cautious. Some other ones that you'll see there, at least Sally isn't suffering anymore. Again, it speaks to the very first one on that list. We don't know if Sally is suffering anymore or not. And the next one, it's probably for the best, is really one that's not good for the griever. And when I talked about I know how you feel, you want to be careful. You could say, I appreciate the emotional roller coaster you must be going through, or the emotions that you must be feeling. You could say, I can appreciate that, but to say you know how the griever feels is not an accurate statement. Another one, get a hold of yourself, Sally. So-and-so wouldn't want you to be like this, or Sally wouldn't want you to be like this. At least you still have your, other children. Say, for example, if the griever's daughter or son died, someone saying, at least you still have your other sons or daughters, certainly is not helpful. And you can always find another child in this case, or you can find another spouse. I particularly experienced a comment like that from a friend of mine who, so as I mentioned, my husband had died in November, and in February of that following year, so just a few months later, a friend of mine said, "Oh, don't worry, Marion, you will find another boy, another man, another husband, whatever." And at that point in time, I said, "Really?" I'm thinking, I am not in the dating game at all. So just be careful with what you're saying. I know it's a nervous point in time for people. And at least it was a good way to go. I'm not sure there's a really good way to go. That's all I'll say on that one. And you just need to keep busy and you'll get over it. People really don't get over it. There's lots of opportunities or times in a year, and it can be years later, where something will trigger the emotions again. So what can you do, and what's good to stay away from? So be compassionate, be a friend, not a therapist. Listen. Grievers really just want to be listened to. They want a listening ear. Be present. If they see that your eyes are wandering off and they can tell you're not listening and you're not present, they will stop the conversation, and they probably won't share their inner thoughts and feelings with you again. So just be present and listen. They don't need to be fixed, so refrain from being a therapist. They just want to be listened to. Accept their silence or their need to be alone. One of the things that I did was I said to my family and friends, one of my boundaries was, if you invite me to a family function or an event, I just want you to know that I don't know how I'm going to feel that day. So when that day comes, I may not feel like being around a bunch of people. So I am hoping that I can reserve the right to back out at the last minute on that day. And for me, that was probably one of the best strategies, and I think, my family and friends were certainly very accommodating that way. Acknowledge the griever's tears and other expressions of grief without judgment. Going back to that point about not being a therapist or that the griever needs fixing. Just listen and acknowledge their emotions. Attend a funeral or memorial service if you feel comfortable doing so. I gave a presentation a few weeks ago, and someone said that they didn't feel right in attending a former coworker's funeral because they never really got along with the individual or liked the individual, and so they felt that it would be hypocritical of them to attend the funeral or the memorial service. And I would say that's whatever you feel is appropriate in doing is what you need to do as the person who is making that decision. Respect cultural differences in rituals and the grieving process. Going back to that earlier comment about God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, you want to make sure that who you're referencing or saying, talking about God to, indeed does believe in God, for example. So that just respecting that, or any other cultural differences in terms of how to greet a griever in a certain culture or what their traditions are. Write a note of support or encouragement. I found that personally to be extremely helpful. The many cards that I got were of great comfort. One of the cards that stood out for me, there were many, but one line within that card that stood out for me was, there's no right or wrong way to grieve, there's only your way. And because I didn't know how I was supposed to act or behave, or how are you supposed to do this grieving. Excuse me for a second. Okay. And so having that kind of encouragement through a note was helpful. Be aware of anniversaries and holidays, because those are difficult days for people and for grievers. And urge them to be patient with themselves. I wasn't so patient with myself. I thought, geez, I need to get on with this. I need to get over this. And it just doesn't work that way. Grief is what I call layers and clusters intertwining with each other, and it's messy. So I just needed to be patient with myself. Going through any transition, that's what I would recommend, whether the transition or the loss is a job, career, finances, a house. Kind of going back to that 40-plus losses, those are just a few of them. Separation or marriage. There's other ones such as pet loss is becoming more and more prevalent, and mostly because baby boomers have really they are the ones who are following the trend of having pets as they get older, and so that one is pet loss is becoming a bit more prevalent, and the dollars that it costs for a worker losing a pet is right up there with any other loss. So just have them be patient with themselves. Be available for them, maintain your support throughout the months ahead, and accept that you cannot make them feel better. And some things that you want to keep in mind is, don't ignore or downplay the loss. Everybody feels their grief at 100%. It doesn't matter what the loss is. They feel their grief at 100%. And as I mentioned before, if I had the same loss as someone else, it doesn't mean that because my friend's relationship with her mom maybe wasn't the best, it doesn't mean that that loss was any less for her. I would say avoid mentioning the deceased's name is one that you don't want to do. Grievers like to hear their deceased loved one's name mentioned. It means they haven't been forgotten, and it gives them a sense of closeness still to their loved one. Looking the other way or changing the subject is something that you want to avoid doing. It's uncomfortable for people who are listening to a griever, and the griever knows that already. That's why they end up in grieving in isolation and being alone, is because when they start to talk about their loss and their grief and how they're feeling, people will change the subject or they'll look the other way. And I realize that there's maybe a point in time where, it's appropriate to sort of change the subject if it's, an hour or 2 or 3 hours later. That may be something that you want to consider, but just be very sensitive to that. Try not to be judgmental. Some people think that it's better to leave a griever to grieving, and so they stay away from them. I would encourage you not to do that. I would encourage you to be there for them, and they will let you know if they don't want you around at that point in time. I have a friend currently who is going through treatments and so forth. So there's a sense of loss of what was in terms of their health. And so that brings on a set of emotions similar, if not the same, that you would have when you're grieving the death of a loved one. And my friend has been very upfront in saying, when I would ask if, you know, she wants to get together for dinner, for example, she will tell me, well, that week's not a good week, I don't know how I'm going to feel, and or we'll set the date. And she also took my advice and said that, you know, could she reserve the right to cancel out on at the last minute should she not feel well that day. And don't be afraid of their suffering. It's okay, and it's okay for them to have the emotions that they have. So some practical ways to help. I've listed 7 of them here. I'm sure there's more. Coordinate redistribution of your colleagues' work is important to help them transition back into the workplace. Lend a hand when your coworker returns. So some coworkers, some colleagues, for example, they will want to keep busy, and that's why maybe they come back to work earlier because they want to be around people, they don't want to be alone, or they are coming back to work because they want to stay busy doing work. And but at the same time, I mentioned before about presenteeism, they may not be as productive as they once were, and so you want to make sure that you're there to lend a hand if they require it. Organize additional support at home for your coworker. So as I mentioned, you know, picking up the kids, taking them to school, bringing them home to your place after school so that you can look after them until your coworker, who is the griever, gets home to pick them up. Donate a vacation day. Now, you'll have to check that out with Human Resources to make sure that that would actually work from an administrative point of view in your workplace. But it definitely is a very generous offering, especially if afterwards the griever has a lot of paperwork to go through, a lot of administration details to work through, such as meeting with their financial advisor, their lawyer, and daycare perhaps, etc. Coordinate an in-service on grief. This is something many years ago where I used to work. We had a coworker whose wife, they drove to their family's Christmas gathering in early the last weekend in Christmas in December, and as they were driving home on New Year's Day, they had taken separate vehicles there, and on the way home his wife was killed in a car accident. And because there were so many of us who were close to our coworker, the Human Resources Department arranged for an in-service counselor to come on board to share with us some of the same things I'm sharing with you today. What to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do. And I'll admit, when I think back to that time, I know there was, I remember specifically one thing I said, and I thought, oh boy, why did I say that? But in hindsight, it's great. But, now that I know what I know, I would have never said that. So organize an appropriate memorial if that's something that you think is good to do for your coworker. And then watch for warning signs of self-destructive behavior. Some of those symptoms that I mentioned earlier. You know, if someone's got a pretty calm demeanor in their workplace when they're working with you, and all of a sudden they're becoming a lot more angry or, blunt or flying off the handle, then you just watch for those signs to make sure that they're okay, or have them go through your employee assistance program for some support, because we're not counselors or therapists, so we can listen, But in terms of helping people through grieving, it really needs some care and sensitivity and someone with some experience. So what's in it for me in terms of your employees if you are providing the support? The good news is that the employee's okay, the griever's okay. The griever doesn't need fixing. Grief is about a broken heart, not a broken brain. And so if you are providing the patients and support and understanding to help them transition back into their work, then they're going to be very appreciative of that and not feel like you're trying to fix them or that you're trying to provide counseling. And so you want them to feel better. You want them to, the employee will eventually feel better if they do the work. And that's what I refer to from the grief recovery team is grievers need to do the work in order to feel better and reclaim their circumstances in their life and find a new meaning for living. There's a new normal life. Lots of grievers have worked through it and come through it, and I'm one of those individuals who has made a new meaning for living and a new life. The employee will also get to at some point enjoy fond memories without the feelings of regret or remorse, particularly if they have done some work and worked through their grief. They will be able to feel sad and talk about those feelings no matter how others react. So they'll get to a point where it's okay and they'll feel sad and they're going to talk about it regardless of how the listener feels. They'll be able to forgive others when they say or do things that are based on their lack of knowledge about grief, but are probably meant with good intentions. So some people will say, when I talked earlier about intellectual versus emotional, they'll say, oh, he's in a better place. Or if that's the case, that's intellectually could be true, but emotionally it doesn't help the griever. Or they might say, oh, it's okay, you can have another child, you're young, you can have another child. Albeit that may be true as well. Intellectually, it's true. Emotionally, it doesn't help. So grievers can become, if they do the work and work through their feelings and emotions, can be very forgiving people. And it's a very important, forgiveness is a very important piece of the grief recovery program that we help grievers work through because harboring all of those emotions and feelings is really hurtful and harmful to the griever. And not the one that they are spiteful towards. And the griever will realize one day that their ability to talk about their loss is normal and healthy. And they acquire the skills that they should have been taught in childhood. So the skills of grief recovery about how to heal your heart. So recovery is achieved by a series of small and correct actions and actions made by the griever. And so there is such a thing as grief recovery. There is such a thing as recovering from your grief. And just a bit more to talk about what our team is about and how we can support you in your workplace or how we can support people that you may know who are going through a difficult time. So our services, we have a group program that is a 7-week program. It's 2 hours per week, and there is, I'll call it homework in between, and that's what I call doing the work. So it helps people to work through their grief. We have one-on-one individualized program as well, and that is per session, and based on per session, and so the individual can determine the number of one-on-one sessions that they will need. We generally start with the 7 weeks, but I know last year I worked with an individual, and we got to the 6th week, and I asked if she felt that she wanted to move on or if she wanted to meet again, and she said, yeah, I think I need at least 2 more above and beyond the 7 weeks. So we went for 10 weeks, and I think that that was very helpful for this individual. We provide educational information sessions, just like I'm doing today, webinars, and coming to your workplace and providing those informational sessions, and that's complimentary, it's free of charge. We do have workshops as well that we can provide to you in the workplace. If they're, so it's not a workshop to help rectify a problem with a griever or grievers. It's a workshop that's educational and a bit of interaction within that workshop. And then, of course, speaking and presentations is another service that we provide. So the program itself, there's a set of action steps and time for reflection, sharing and listening, and completion. And we use the Grief Recovery Handbook as a guide for the program. This is not, the Grief Recovery Outreach Program is not a support group or a drop-in program. So we are highly respectful of the players that are at in this session because it can be very disruptive if we were to do a drop-in type program. People are sharing their innermost thoughts and feelings with people at the session, and it needs to be constant sharing between them versus people coming in and out of it. So basically, just a quick overview of the program. I call it the 4 main steps. There's the first step, which is doing a loss history graph from the first conscious memory of whatever loss it might be. For children, their first loss that they experience could be trust or safety. Could be, for a lot of adults, they'll recall their pet as their first loss. Or it could be that they lost a parent when they were really young, which was, in my case, my dad died when I was really young. So for me, that was my first recollection of a loss for me personally. And then the second step that you go through, and so you do a sharing and listening, as I mentioned, and you have a listening partner and the sharing partner, and you go through your loss history graph from beginning to end and share the ups and the downs of that graph. The second step is taking one of the losses, one of the relationships, and it could be that what you came in thinking you were going to work on because it was a current loss that you're experiencing, that may not be the loss that you choose to work on with the relationship graph. It could be a loss from 10 years ago. It could be a loss 15 years ago that you haven't resolved. You have unresolved grief, or you have unresolved communication. And so this is a way for the individual to finally work through that. We've found that if people don't work through their grief, the emotions and the grief accumulates and builds up, and because they suppress it due to, our society teaches us to, get on with it, get busy, get over it kind of thing, as opposed to being able to work through that grief. Or, as one of the primary myths of grief is time heals all wounds. Time doesn't heal the wounds. It's the work that you do within that time that helps you to heal. If you think of a child who's abused when they are young, and then they become an adult, and they wonder why they're, have this unfavorable behavioral pattern that keeps happening and happening, and it's generally because they haven't had an opportunity when they were young. They didn't know how to articulate how they were feeling. They didn't know what they were feeling was grief, and so they become an adult, and now they have the opportunity to do that. So time doesn't really heal all wounds, so just be aware of that, even for any of your coworkers. So as a person takes that relationship and they work through the graph, again, it's a relationship graph with that loss, ups and downs, positives and negatives of that relationship. And they come back the next week and they share that with their listening partner, and then they switch positions, and the listening partner then becomes the sharing partner. After that, we ask the participants to take that relationship and use the three recovery components and write a completion letter. And once they return with that completion letter, again, there's the sharing and listening partner experience, and it's extremely impactful and powerful to watch people work through this and come out the other end feeling better about the relationship with that loss, because they were able to finally release their feelings and not have it suppressed down into their bodies, and ultimately can create all kinds of illnesses that can crop up as a result of that accumulation of grief. And so our commitment as a grief recovery team is to ensure that you have a safe environment where you can share openly and honestly. We encourage people to bring their truth to the table. Otherwise, it's kind of the old adage that what you put into it is what you will get out of it. So if you put your 100% into it and you share your truth, one of the things that we talk about in the program is bedevilment versus enshrinement with relationships. We encourage people to watch and be mindful of, if the relationship wasn't that great, not to bedevil that individual who is now not present. For example, if it's a divorce, a situation of a divorce, it's a two-way street. It's a commitment of marriage, and so in that case, you don't want to downgrade the individual that's part of this relationship where two people are responsible for it. Conversely, you don't want to put someone high on a pedestal either, that, oh, they could have done no wrong or they did no wrong. So we provide that safe environment for people to share. It's confidential as well. I think that's a fairly obvious one. And we have a commitment to help people throughout the program, even out of the session. So during the week that we are not together, we are available. That being our grief recovery team is available to help support people. So just to share with you that the grief recovery method, that's the method that we use. The goal is to help you complete your relationship to the pain, the isolation, and loneliness that is caused by a significant emotional loss. And while death and divorce may seem to be the most obvious losses, our groups are not just talking about that. I did have one of the individuals who acquired diabetes really young, and the individual was fairly young anyways. And so 4 years of dealing with this, finally she wanted to work through her feelings around the grief of her loss of health, and she was very active as well, and so there was a real sense of loss of I'm not able to do what I once was able to do, and so how do I regain my life and live still a wonderful life? And as I mentioned, we use the Grief Recovery Handbook as a guide. You can purchase the Grief Recovery Handbook through our website or through the Grief Recovery Institute's website as well. Just some testimonials that we've had over the years. They're on our website. I don't expect you to read through them, but just want you to know that we've had some good successes. And just to wrap up in terms of our contact information, our website is www.griefrecoveryteam.com, and our email address, we can be reached at griefrecoveryteam@gmail.com, and our phone numbers 519-616-1018. That's where I can be reached personally. That's my mobile. And the other number that we are also available that you can contact, and we have voicemail. So if we're not there, just leave a message at 519-893-2372. So I want to just thank you for listening. I hope that there were some nuggets of information that will be helpful for you. And please feel free to reach out to me at any time. We do have a few minutes. If someone has some questions, I can try to answer them to the best of my ability. So if there are any questions, feel free to submit them.
Thank you very much for coming in today, Marion.
Thank you.
So I don't think we have any questions, but what you can do if something comes up and you prefer to speak to Marion is contact her at any of those numbers or the email address below. Or you can also just shoot me an email and respond to the notification that you received for the webinar, and I can put you in touch with her. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.